There it is. Okay. Open up the chat. Okay. Can everybody see this? You see historical linguistics on there? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's see. I think where we were looking at that passage of the Bible that was translated, right? All the way back to Old English. So I think that's what we last left off on. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what I want you to get from this is what? You tell me. Mute yourselves.
That a
Well,
lot of things can be lost in translation.
okay, yes, that things can be lost in translation, but we're looking at, where English changed over time, right? So what we're doing is looking at the different ways that language changes. Yes? First of all, how does language change? Do you remember what we talked about last time?
New words could be put in, or lots of letters.
Exactly. Okay, so the new words part is called a lexical change, right? So that brand new words enter into our vocabulary, right? Where do new words come from?
I think we said from the French, from different languages being incorporated.
Okay, that's called a loan word or a borrowing. And so yes, that can enter into English or into a language from another language. You borrow from another language. Which one on this was borrowed? Do you remember? That'll be important for upcoming quizzes and tests. Anyone can chime in. You just got to unmute yourself. Do you know how to do that? You click on your picture, or I think there is a way to do it. There's a mute button actually in the on the little panel all the way on the left. I'm hearing crickets out there.
I don't remember the French.
Yeah, which word on here in the modern English section, which word actually came from French? Do you remember? Did we get that far?
I think we did.
It's a word that appears in modern English that doesn't appear in any of the others.
Is it accent?
Is it
Accent, that's right. Yes. Samuel actually wrote it on here too. Was that Samuel that just talked to me? It was? Okay.
That was Jesse.
Oh, okay. Jesse. Yes, both Jesse and Sam are right. It's accent. So accent up here, which we like to say accent, which is different from the accent. But that is actually a French loanword. And after the year 1066, especially, a lot of French words started entering into English, and that continued happening. Early modern English, that word may well have been in early modern English, but in this case, we're not seeing it replacing where it says actually, thy speech bewrayeth thee, right? Your accent gives you away. Okay, so there was a few different things I want you to get out of this in terms of these here. So we have accent up at the top, and then we have that spelling change, right? In the second early modern English, where the VNTO for unto. So that would be what type of a change? Do you remember? Begins with an O.
Orthographic.
Orthographic change, exactly. It's a spelling change for languages that are written down. Okay. And then in the third Middle English, do you see where it says "studen, kamen, and seden" in purple?
That's a grammatical change.
That's a grammatical change, exactly. So in those cases, they have inflected endings that we don't use anymore in the past tense in that case. But you see also the bewrayeth thee in second early modern English in the second section. And bewrayeth would be a whole lexical replacement. So we don't use that word anymore. That's a word that we've gotten rid of. So all of these are important to know. There's one more that I wanted you to see down at the bottom in Old English. Do you see what that I just highlighted in purple? After the sodlis, what does that say?
Thu.
Thu, exactly. That's the letter thorn. And thu actually changes into what word in Middle English?
Vowel.
Vowel.
Changes into thou, exactly. So thu used to be pronounced as thu, but then it was written by the French as thou, which they pronounced as thu. But then English speakers started pronouncing it as thou. And so that would be called a sound shift. So let's review. If we go through all of these, we have, whoops, let's do it this way. We have lexical change where old or archaic words are totally replaced. We have grammatical changes where that changes in syntax and morphology, like student and seden and kamen. We have also, and then actually you could say just the use of the archaic words thee and thou would be grammatical changes as well as archaic words. So some of these are, double dipping in a few different categories. The sound change where you see, for example, thu changes to thou. In many cases, like you see with English accents, Australian English, right? And then British English and American English and Southern American English and Californiese, right? What we find most of all changing rapidly are vowels. So the vowels change, whereas the consonants change more slowly. And at least that seems to be true in Indo-European languages. In tonal languages, you have totally different types of change with tone and things like that. Okay. So we have the borrowing, which are now words like accent, words from other languages. In fact, we're going to do a project in the future. I think it's your third paper assignment, which is going to be about this. I do have to talk about your second paper assignment, which is going to be a little more complex to try to do virtually, but I'm going to do my best to put something together for you to understand how to do family trees. And Sophie's walking down the stairs. Okay. So we're getting a tour of Sophie's house. Or maybe it's not Sophie's house. Anyway, that's the two of them. They're right there together, just like in class. Okay. I can see all of your houses. You can put a jazzy background, actually, so I can't see your house if you want to be private.
How do you do that?
You go to, it's kind of fun. You go to where it says the video, the little video icon. If you click on that, it says choose a virtual background. And you can float in space. You can actually put any photo up there and so on. It's kind of fun. Okay, so where was I? Back to work. Oh yeah, we go back here. I don't know how to go the previous slide. That's one thing I don't know how to do. Whoa, there we go. I have to push the buttons. Okay, so the last one was the orthographic or spelling changes. And of course, that's only for languages that are actually written down, right? Okay. So moving on, what happened in English here is English, just like any other language, English has a massive history. And I want to show you, I'm going to type in the chat here so everybody can see. It's like writing on the board. The word is philology. Okay. You don't have to have your video on, Madeline, actually. So, and yes, if you have a 2-year-old using you as a jungle gym in the background, no worries. Just keep yourself on mute. But no, I don't have to see your face unless you want me to see your face. I would love to see your faces, but yes, you can keep it on just on your name. I see your names up there though. Okay, so the word is, so yes, Ali has a kid that's singing too. All right, good. So the word is philology. And what philology is the history of individual, oops, language. The history of an individual language. I'll write this up here. So the study of the history of English would be called English philology in this case. And so take a look at this little diagram or timeline. And you can see it actually starts even before English was a language. In Great Britain, the languages that were spoken there actually anciently, we don't even know what languages were spoken by the people who built Stonehenge, for example. That was before the Celts even came in. And the Celts, who speak, Irish and Scottish and Welsh and so on, inhabited England for quite a long time. And then the Romans arrive bringing Latin. They invade. If you actually want to see a cool series, there's one called Britannia about that moment in time. It's rather dramatized, but it's fun. It involves lots of psychedelic drugs. Moving on. So when actually the Anglo-Saxons finally arrived about, between the 1st and 5th century, that was where English proper came in. So the Anglo-Saxons were actually from around Denmark, as well as the coast of the Netherlands. And there were several different groups that invaded. There's also the Jutes, I believe. And they all came into England and set up camp in various places and started kingdoms there. And that is the roots of English there. So English is a Germanic language that is related to Dutch and German and the Scandinavian languages like Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, and Icelandic. Okay, so speaking of those people, they invaded, actually, the Vikings brought in Old Norse, and that's actually what caused a simplification of English, where we ended up cutting off a lot of those inflections that we saw before, like studen and kamen and seden. The Vikings had their own inflected versions from their Germanic roots. And then both of our languages, the Viking Norse as well as English, ended up removing those to simplify communication. And then in 1066, as I mentioned, the French came in. Actually, they were Vikings as well, the Norman French. If you watch that show Vikings, you'll see Rollo. He's the one who goes to Paris. Anyway, so it's sort of semi-historical. So then the Normans bring in French, and the royal families become French derived, and that ends up actually contributing to what we call Middle English. And so Chaucer and Shakespeare and so on, that is the kind of English that you're associated with, the great literature traditions of Chaucer and Shakespeare. And then with the Renaissance actually happening in the 15th century, you have all of the, of course, intellectual languages of Latin, Greek, French, Italian, all of these different things filter into English and contribute. And now, of course, with the age of colonialism and the spread of English to the Americas, to Canada, Australia, and all over the place, in India, you have many different Englishes, of course, that have evolved from that. So it just shows you, the incredible history that can take place just in one language. And this is the language that I am speaking and the one that you are understanding, I hope, if you have me not on mute. Okay, moving on. Somebody said something. Madeline said equal sign. I'm guessing that might be her child that's climbing all over her. Okay, moving on. Here we go. So yes, the Vikings, there we go. So the invasion of the Vikings actually contributed a lot to the evolution of Middle English. If we look at the map of where England was at the time, right when the Vikings invaded, you can see actually many different kingdoms, in which case, that had slightly different languages where they were speaking different versions of English. And the Vikings start taking over in the north, and then they incorporate and intermarry and so on. It wasn't just always a brutal invasion. But here's something fun. So in languages, we tend to see that vowels, especially English and European languages, we tend to see that vowels change more rapidly. And we do know that there was what we call the Great Vowel Shift from 1450 to 1700 that took place in England. And take a look at this. So the way that we say that word B-I-T-E is how? Anyone want to try?
Beat.
My mic was muted.
Bite. That's okay. You have to unmute yourself so I can
Bite.
hear you. Thanks, Adam. So bite. So we say bite.
Oh no, bite.
But take a look actually at the IPA vowel that's just to the right of bite, and you'll see how we used to pronounce it before the Great Vowel Shift. And what is that IPA letter I? How do you say it?
Beat.
B, exactly. And the colon after it means an elongated vowel. So we used to say the word bite as beat. In other words, that dog beat me. Yes? I know, it's weird, isn't it? But the word right below it, beat, as in beetroot, or to beat someone, we used to say as bait. And so we used to say, I got to eat my baits. I got to beat my baits. Yes. I know it sounds funny to us, but that was how English was properly spoken before the Great Vowel Shift. And we used to say, we used to put bait on, you put bait on a fish hook, but actually we used to call that bat. I have to put some bat on my fish hook, and I'm going to eat my, hold on. I'm going to beat my baits. Yes, but I got to put bat on the fish hook.
Don't bait yourself up, Professor.
Thank you. Yes, no, I'm not very good at all this, but if you look at the word, and that this is still true of the Canadian accent, Canadian English, which derives a lot from Scotland. But in the upper right, you have the word ABOUT, and how do we say that word?
About.
We say about, right? Especially in California, we say about in the back of our throat. But actually, in between early and modern English, we used to say this word as a boot. And you hear that typically in Canada still today. What's this all about? You know what I'm talking about? Have you heard this
Yeah,
before?
you do.
We love to make fun of Canadians because of it. Yes. Okay. But the word boot, which is the thing that you put on your feet, yes, used to be boat. I gotta put my boats on. What's this all about? Do you hear the difference? But then that thing that you get in and you sail across the ocean is actually called a bite. So I'm going in my bites, I'm putting on my boats, and what's this all about? Do you understand the great vowel shift and how fascinating and amazing it is that vowels change quite rapidly, actually, just in a few hundred years. And you can see those vowel differences even get more exaggerated with just Australian English and the diphthongs and triphthongs they have when they speak. And you know, American English versus British English. That's just in a couple hundred years. Okay, moving on. The processes of sound change. So I don't want you to necessarily memorize these, but I'm just going to try and go over some of them. Don't stress about writing all these down and memorizing them. But I just want you to know that there's very specific ways that we refer to different types of sound change in English. So this is just one of those multiple types of how language changes, but it's the one that includes sound change, which is, of course, we know a regular thing that happens over time. And so you can hear people speaking differently, for instance, of younger generation compared to the older generation. All right, so we have the process called assimilation, which is the influence of one sound on sounds nearby or adjacent sounds. And examples of that would be, if I can get this to work, say the word Handbag for me. Okay, most of us will not say handbag. We will say it as handbag. But there is no M in handbag. But why do we say an M? Somebody tell me.
Because it's easier with the B.
With the B, exactly. We take the nasal N, we convert it to an M, and then because the M and the B are both what's? I know I told you I wasn't going to test you on this stuff ever again, but guess what? You need to know some of it.
Bilabial.
They are both bilabial, exactly. So an M is a bilabial and a B is a bilabial. So it's just easier because we're lazy. It's easier for us to say quickly, handbag, handbag, handbag. And it's not a bag in which you put your ham, I hope. It is actually just a handbag. Do you understand assimilation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay, good. Moving on. So dissimilation is a change in one of two adjacent same sounds, and that would be something like this. We used to actually say the L in colonel, but of course we do not say the L. We convert the L into its sister liquid R, and we say kernel, which is more like kernel of corn. And so sometimes what you see is actually a change to another word that we already have, as in kernel, and we want it to sound like that word. We want it to be a homonym, but it really isn't. So the original pronunciation of, in fact, in French, they will still say it, because I believe this is a French loan word, colonel. So in French, you will say colonel, but we say colonel. Okay, this is an interesting one. This one sounds like something cancerous, but it actually is a different word. The word itself is metathesis. It is not to metastasize. Please do not confuse that with a cancerous tumor. Anyway, metathesis is reversal of two sounds, and you hear that with kids when they're learning to speak English and they try to say words like spaghetti. What do kids often do with spaghetti?
Spaghetti.
Paschetti, right? Do you see how you take the S and the P and they flip it around? So instead of spa, which is hard for kids to actually do, they say paschetti, paschetti. Okay, so we know this happens actually in the history of English because the word third, as in the ordinal number, first, second, and third, um, originally in Old English, it comes from the word three, right? But the word three, actually, the original ordinal number was thrid. I went first, second, and thrid. And so with third, what happens?
Right.
What did we do to the thrid?
R and the I switch.
We flipped the R and the I, exactly. And that's called a what?
Metastasis.
Not a metastasis.
Metathesis.
I know, it's easier for me to say metathesis if you think about it, but it's metathesis. The
Metathesis.
accent is on the second syllable. Okay, moving on. So the next one up is actually called a haplology, which is another fun word to say. Try saying haplology.
Haplology.
Haplology. Okay, that's when we drop one repeating sound. So if there is a repeating sound in a word, like the word, can anybody say this word and say every little sound in it for me?
Probably.
Probably, right? Most of us will not take the time to actually say probably, right? There's too many ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-bas in it. So instead we just say probably. In fact, some people will now even drop the B and just say probably.
Probably.
You heard that before? Yes?
Yes.
I'm probably going to go outside. Yes? All right. So next one up is called a merger, where we merge two different sounds together. This is something that you Californians have done without even knowing it. You say these words the same way. Can you do it for me to give me a little bit of a chuckle on this gloomy day?
Cot and cot.
Cot and cot, and then
Dawn.
Don and Don. Okay. But in real English, tee hee hee, in actual English from England, they would say, I'm going to sleep on my cot and I got caught. Yes? There are different vowels there. And then there's the name dawn and then the dawn of the day. So those were originally two different vowels, but in Californiaese, they have been merged together. So one of those vowels has been removed. Okay. A split is where you originally have one sound and that becomes two sounds actually. And this is an interesting example. So where allophones of one phoneme become two separate phonemes. This is a hard one to explain because actually the F and the V were originally just allophones of one phoneme. And if you think of the word, right, let me think, leaf and leaves and half and halves, those were actually just allophones of one phoneme. They were originally understood to just be one single phoneme. They were not separate letters originally. They became two separate phonemes, F and V, actually, over time. So that's an example of a split. Here's another one. We used to say the word live with the F, actually. So I'm going to live very long. I'm going to live a long life. Live a life. So the differentiation between those two is actually in the vowel and not in the F and the V sounds. But they split over time. And we also have the word shelf and shelve, right? So it used to be that you were just going to put you're going to shelf the shelves, but then it was easier to turn that into a vocalized fricative over time. Okay, a loss is a loss of a sound. For example, can this thing get working? Here we go. Someone say these words for me, please.
Thought.
Thought and brought.
Brought.
Thought and brought. Thank you, Annalisa. And Adam, thought and brought. But what's weird about those words and how we spell them?
There's a GH in there?
Yeah, what the hell is that GH doing there, right? And this makes English one of the worst languages to learn how to spell, as many of you know. And it just seems to be nonsensical. But what this is called is a fossilization. And so when English was just first written down during the times when the Romans came in and brought their orthography, or these letters that were brand new to English speakers who never wrote anything down, they then decided to spell out the actual sounds that they had. And we used to have a phoneme, which is a Germanic phoneme, which you also see in Hebrew and Arabic, which is that guttural cha. It's down in the uvula, right? You got to say cha like that. And so those words used to be pronounced as thocht and brocht. But we don't say that anymore because what has happened? We have lost the sound. But the fossilization is still there, and so that's been one way that we actually know how it used to be pronounced. And we can hear very similar sounding words in our sister languages, like in Dutch and German. Okay. In Hawaiian, so some of you working on Hawaiian, we have a loss of the T sound that you find in their sister languages in Tahiti. And so, of course, the name of Tahiti itself begins with a T, but Hawaiians actually took that T, threw it out, and replaced it with the sound that Tahitians already had, which is a K. So Tahitians have both T and K, but Hawaiians cannot say the T anymore. They have no T. It's all gone bye-bye. So tell me now how you think that Hawaiians say Tahiti.
Kahiti?
Kahiki. Yes, exactly. Kahiki. So remember, mele kaliki maka is the thing to say on a blue Hawaiian Christmas? Yes. It's because they have lost the T sound. All right. And for some reason, the Polynesian languages, Hawaiian in particular, has lost the most phonemes, actually, of any language. It has the fewest number of consonants and vowels of any language in the world. Okay. Moving on. I think this basically does it. One more. So there's another group of them called syncope and apocope, where you have the loss of the medial or final sounds. And that is basically like the word, can anybody say T-A-M-E-D for me?
Tamed.
Tamed, as in a tamed a shrew. I tamed a lion. Okay, but it used to be actually pronounced temede, temede. So we lost the final sound in there actually. And we actually lost a medial sound, the M, between the M and the D. And so we squeezed it all together. And even though we've still put an E in between the M and the D, we don't actually pronounce it. We don't say tamed, and we don't say tamede. So we've lost both of those by it's just basically kind of the physical laziness of our mouths that ends up directing a lot of these things. Okay. So what are we looking at now? I think I've showed you something similar before, yes?
Yeah.
What is it?
The language map of
So
Indo-European languages.
it is a map of Indo-European languages. Okay, but notice there are some non-Indo-European languages on here. And what are those non-Indo-European languages?
Basque, Hungarian, Estonian, and Finnish.
Yes. If I wiggle my cursor over this, can you see it moving around?
Yeah.
You can? Okay, good. So what's this one down here?
Basque.
That's Basque, exactly. That's the, and what is Basque now?
It's the
Language isolate.
It's a language isolate. And tell me what a language isolate is, please.
Means that there are no related languages to it, and it's by itself.
Exactly. So it's the only survivor of its language family. Whereas all of these other languages that have color on them, those are all related to one another and to a common ancestor, which we call Proto-Indo-European. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But let's look at these other non-Indo-European languages. There's one smack dab in the middle of Eastern Europe here. Which one is that?
Hungarian.
That's Hungarian. And actually, Hungarian is not a language isolate. It is related to these up here in the north. And what are these? Which one is this?
Estonian and Finnish.
That's Finnish, exactly. And then here,
Is Estonian.
Estonian.
okay, precisely. Lithuanian and Latvian actually are actually Indo-European languages. Some people get them confused with these others. Hungarian, Estonian, and Finnish, as well as the Sami languages, which are spoken all up in here, the reindeer herders, which is where the story of Santa Claus came from. Did I tell you that once upon a time?
No.
Oh, I'll have to do that then. All right. So for another time. But these are called Uralic languages, named after this mountain range here, which is called what?
The Ural Mountains.
The Ural Mountains, because most of the other Uralic languages are actually way over here in Siberia from other reindeer herding peoples that live in teepees. Those are the Uralic languages, but these have been here for quite a while: Finnish, Sami, Estonian, and Hungarian. Those are actually not Indo-European languages. They're not in the same language family. They come from another common ancestor that came from out in the Ural Mountains. Okay, so you need to know the general groupings of subfamilies in Indo-European languages. Of course, we have here, what's down here?
Romance.
In the Iberian Peninsula, we have Portuguese and Spanish, and then up here in France, and then in Italy, and Sardinia, and Corsica, and over here in Romania are the Romance languages named after ancient Rome, right? Okay. Our language family is, a subfamily is which one?
Germanic.
Germanic, exactly. Icelandic up here. Do you see this chat box up here if I move this around? Can you see
No.
this? No? Okay, that's just my version of the chat box, but you do see the cursor. Okay,
Yeah.
so Icelandic, I'm very sad. I had to cancel my trip to Iceland where I was going to go on spring break because of this damn disease. So I just pulled the plug on that, which is probably a smart thing. But anyway, I am no longer going to Iceland this spring. I'm so sad. Okay, I'm just gonna be stuck in my cave with the rest of you. So, but we'll make the best of it. So this is the Germanic subfamily here. And if you look here, this is Denmark, and this is actually the coast of the Netherlands. This is where English originally came from. So the various different tribes that then sailed across the channel and then invaded the Britons who lived here. So all of England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland were Celtic speaking at one point. That little spot right there, that nose on France, there are still Breton speaking people there that speak a Celtic language. They actually, the women have these really cool hats that they wear. They look like little kind of white cylinder chef hats. Anyway, so Britain itself actually went extinct in the British Isles themselves, but the island of Great Britain was named after those people whose language is now extinct. And we don't have very much evidence of that language other than some little metal tiles, actually, these lead metal tiles that people inscribed with Roman letters speaking Briton, and they threw them into the ancient Roman baths, actually, and most of them are curses. So the surviving written versions of Briton from Great Britain actually are just from little curse tiles. Okay, over here in green, we have which languages, which include Russian, Polish, Czech, Slovenian, as well as Croatian. Those are all which ones? Slavic languages, which is where the word slave comes from, because they were the slaves for whom? Anybody know?
Romans.
For these people down here who have their own subfamily.
Greeks.
The Greeks. The Greeks gave us the word slave because they would invade these people to the north, capture them, and bring them back as outsiders who they thought were fit for slavery. Okay. And the US system actually originally modeled itself after the Greeks, the neoclassical tradition, where the US, felt like it was justified for them to have slaves that they brought from Africa. That was modeled after Greece. So here actually is an extinct Indo-European subfamily called Anatolian, and that includes a language that is the earliest written version of any Indo-European language, called Hittite. I'll write that on the chat board here. The earliest written Indo-European. In cuneiform, actually. Now, cuneiform was a writing system, as we'll see, that is the earliest writing system in the world. And if you follow my cursor, cuneiform comes from where?
Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia, exactly. And it was Sumerian, which is also another language isolate. That was the very first language ever to write anything down, as we'll see. And they invented cuneiform. What is cuneiform? Do you know?
It's the little sort of like cuts into clay.
Exactly. Oh, would you like to see an actual real artifact of cuneiform I have here in my house?
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me get rid of this. I think I have to stop the share, and then you have to look at my big head. Hold on just a second. Here I go. Can you see me now? I'll be right back.
And he's off to space. Ground control to Major Tom.
Yes, I know, floating in space. Now, if I could only find it. Someone stole my cuneiform.
It was your macaw.
Always the macaw.
It's always a macaw.
I must have squirreled it away somewhere. All right, so that's okay. I will hopefully find it for you for later. But we will do writing systems actually at a later date. But in the meantime, let's go back to where we were. So share desktop again. And where did my slides go? Okay. So let's see. No, I need to get out of this. So I don't know how to do this more easily. Just a second. Here we go. If I open this up, there we go. Escape. Okay. Hard for me to navigate this whole system, but I'll figure it out. Okay, we were right here, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do this. And I think I went here. And did I do full screen? View, whoops, enter full screen. That's good. All right. And I can put you all back over here, right? All right, so back to where we were. I don't know why that keeps doing that. Scooch you guys over here. That's better. Okay, so if you notice, actually, over here in the Caucasus region, you have Armenian, which is also an Indo-European language. And then down here and over here are which languages?
Iranian and Indo.
Yeah, so Iranian would include what languages? Persian, right?
Persian.
Persian, Farsi, Dari, spoken in Afghanistan and in Iran. And then down here in North India, as well as in Sri Lanka, we have the North Indian languages. And this is where the Indo comes from in Indo-European, right? There are a few other small language families which are pretty unique, or subfamilies, which are also Indo-European, like Albanian, and then the Baltic languages up here, and of course the Celtic languages way over here. But all of these actually share a common ancestor. And this is what was a startling realization of a guy named Sir William Jones back in the 1700s. And he was the first one to notice that the languages from North India, like especially Hindi and its ancestor Sanskrit, that those actually are very similar and share a lot of common words with, for example, Latin and Greek. And he was wondering how that could be. So we are going to look at that today. So if we look at the multiple language families in India, Pakistan, and Nepal, and so on, the green in this case would be the Indo-European, and that includes Hindi, Gujarati, Punjabi, as well as many other different languages in North India, and Urdu, for example, in Pakistan. But notice these red languages here. What are they?
Dravidian.
Dravidian, yes. So Dravidian is mostly found in southern India, and it includes languages like Tamil and where's my little box that actually has what happened to it? There it is. I got to put the chat back up so I can see if anybody's trying to chat me. Okay, so these are Dravidian, right? I'll write it out for you again, but it's right on here. The Dravidian language family includes languages like Tamil and Malayalam and Telugu, as well as Kannada, not Canada like the country, but Kannada. Okay, so it also includes this language up here in Pakistan, which is called Brahui. And why do you think, give me a story, tell me a hypothesis. Why do you think that we see most of the Dravidian languages here in the south, and then one spoken up here, way up in the north in Pakistan? Give me a hypothesis about what might have caused that.
Geographic isolation, mountains.
Geographic isolation, okay, but then you have all these other speakers of Indo-European in between.
Did the Indo-European group migrate down and just not be able to get into that area?
That is exactly what we think happened. So we think that their Dravidian languages were the original languages spoken all over in the Indian subcontinent, but that the Indo-Europeans invaded, and we know exactly when that happened, actually about the 1300 BC range, right when King Tut and Akhenaten were in Egypt. So right around that time was when the Indo-Europeans, who are related to the speakers, of course, of all those other languages in Europe, including English, that they invaded this area and then separated the Brahui from the rest of the Dravidian languages to the south. And Alex, I see you have a cuneiform tablet behind you, which is super awesome. Everybody look at Alex's cuneiform. You see it? You have to scroll through the people to see it. Yes, that's what I was trying to show people with my cuneiform tablet, but for some reason I don't know where my cuneiform tablet is, and it's kind of upsetting to me, but I'll find it later. Okay. Anyway, moving on. If you look at the actual political structure of India, many of the pradeshes, or the states in India, the provinces, they are separated by language. And so Tamil, which is one of the most widely spoken Dravidian languages in the south, is really the whole homeland of the Tamil is in Tamil Nadu, which is the Tamil homeland. They are also, if we go back here, notice they're also on the coast, of the northeast coast of Sri Lanka. They were the original inhabitants of Sri Lanka, but then you have an Indo-European group that came from the north 2,000 years ago and invaded actually the south here. And there are stories in Indian mythology about the Ramayana, the great story of Rama and Sita, where Sita is the most beautiful woman in the world, and she gets abducted by this really evil demon, Ravana, who then brings her to Sri Lanka. And then Rama, who is the great, one of the incarnations of Vishnu, he then goes down to Sri Lanka to bring her back. And Hanuman, the monkey, rescues her. It's a whole big story. But today, actually, you might have heard of the Tamil Tigers, who are a group that has been labeled as terrorists because they're setting off bombs and so on. And I think there was one that recently happened at a hotel in Sri Lanka not long ago, last year, I believe. And some of those political tensions have died down, but there is still a linguistic and ethnic tension between the Indo-European speaking peoples who speak Sinhalese. I'll write that here. And actually, the Sinhalese is one of the most beautifully written languages, the writing systems, but so is Tamil. And actually, they're very similar writing systems. They borrowed from one another, but and both of them derive from Sanskrit, which was written down actually in the north way before English was ever written down. But I just wanted to point out that the Tamil and the Sinhalese here are still in conflict on this island. And you see that these other languages actually here are Munda, as well as Mon Khmer. So actually in India, they have languages that belong to the Austro-Asiatic language family related to Cambodian Khmer, which is Cambodian, as well as Vietnamese. Those are the Mon Khmer languages. And then here, the Munda languages are various tribal languages spoken in Bengal, actually over in the eastern part of India. So many different languages. Way up here in the north, you actually see Burushaski, which is a language isolate in the north part of Pakistan, in the Kashmir region, which is still under conflict between India and Pakistan. And then the yellow languages up here belong to the Sino-Tibetan languages, like, for example, Tibetan itself, as Choyang speaks, as well as in Bhutan and over in Burma, right, or Myanmar, and up in China. So those are a totally separate language family. So there are many different language families represented in India, and actually many individual languages, I think up to about 14 official scheduled languages, as they're called. Okay, so let's learn about Billy Jones. Here I introduce to you a hyper-polyglot. Lived from 1746 to 1794. And anybody want to tell me what you think a hyper-polyglot is? Or let's just start with polyglot. What's a polyglot?
Is it someone that can speak many languages?
That's right, Jesse. Someone who could speak many languages. And a hyper-polyglot would then be what?
the max and like super really into learning it.
To the
Speak-
max, exactly. So someone who not just speaks many languages, but way, way, way many languages. So as a child, now of course he was an aristocratic Brit with a lot of money and time on his hands. So he went to, early education, had the highest kind of education. As a child, though, he learned to read and speak Greek, Latin, Persian, Arabic, Hebrew, and Chinese. And then as an adult, he mastered 13 languages and was capable of speaking another 28. Well, so all of us are on our way to becoming a Billy Jones. So that's why I've introduced you to your language, that non-Indo-European language. So we need to catch up. Actually, there is a kid, I've seen videos of him. I'll see if I can find them and post them on Canvas. There's a kid who lives in New York City. He's probably not a kid anymore. He's probably, or in his late teens. And he is a hyper polyglot, and he walks around the different ethnic neighborhoods in New York City and just learns to speak the different languages that he encounters. Anyone that speaks a different language, he starts learning it, he starts speaking with them, and people totally love him. So learn languages, my friends. People will love you. Okay. So let's see. He writes William Jones, the Sanskrit language. No, so at this time in the 1700s, this is when the British East India Company, the corporation, started to explore, India and the lands to the east in order to get spices and food, because we all know British food is terribly boring. And so this was, one of the impetuses for colonialism. So the British go into India, they invade India, they take over India. It becomes, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire eventually, so that it was Queen Victoria herself who was crowned the Empress of India. Imagine that. Anyway, so India at that time was a number of different kingdoms or Maharajas, or kings that ruled over different kingdoms that spoke different languages. But the kingdoms to the north spoke versions of Hindi, Punjabi, and so on, but they used a common written system, actually, which was Sanskrit. And Sanskrit was one of the oldest written versions of an Indo-European language, not as old as Hittite in cuneiform, but pretty old. So Sanskrit goes back actually several thousand years. Well, I would say probably at least 2,000+ years. And Sanskrit was, certainly over 2,000 years. So I think 2,500 years about is how old Sanskrit is. So what he's noticed, actually, Sanskrit is kept alive much like Latin was kept alive by the church. So it's the liturgical language of the Indian scriptures. So many ancient Indian stories called the Vedas and the Upanishads are all written in Sanskrit, which is not the same thing as Hindi. Or modern Indian languages. It's the ancient ancestor, 2,000 years older. But this study of Sanskrit is kept alive by the Brahmin priests, and many people in India still know how to read and understand Sanskrit. And William Jones became interested in Sanskrit, and he was the first to notice, as far as we know, that Sanskrit shares a common root with Latin, Greek, as well as Gothic, which is the ancient Germanic language, Celtic, and Persian languages. So all of them, actually, he realized were all related to a common ancestor. And he was the first person to realize this. So he's really the founder of historical linguistics from the Indo-European side. Okay, so let's read together, shall we? This is Sanskrit, my friends, and this is the opening passage of the original Rig Veda. Can you say Rig Veda? All right.
Rig Veda.
Rig Veda. Okay. And the first passage right here is introducing, actually, the name of this, and it's the Ganesha Yanama. And you know who Ganesha is?
No.
Ganesha is the
Yeah.
elephant-headed deity who's the son of Shiva. And this is just saying that this is this particular version. And Ganesha is the one in later Hinduism that you pray to. Hey, I have a Ganesha right here. Would you like to meet my Ganesha? Hold on just a second. Can you see Ganesha? That's Ganesha. Everybody looking at my face now. Okay, here's Ganesha. Wave, Ganesha. Hi, Ganesha. Okay. So you pray to Ganesha. One second. You pray to Ganesha as the remover of obstacles, who is the one who actually takes things out of the way. I have another little Ganesha here. Here's my little Ganesha. Okay, so Ganesha actually is not a figure that shows up until later in Hinduism. The original Rig Veda, which was the ancient scriptures of the Indo-Europeans, the opening passage, is praying to Agni, and I'll write that here. And Agni is the god of fire. Someone's yawning on me. So get that fire going. Agni is the fire that lives inside you. So Agni is a mouth, actually. And so his name, he refers to this mouth that you feed. And so the Brahmin priests would feed this ritual fire, and they still do, with ghee or clarified butter, which is symbolically associated with something called amrita, which is the elixir of immortality, which is related to a Roman word, or sorry, a Greek word, ambrosia. Have you heard of this before?
He's still yawning.
Who's yawning on me? Is that you, Allie?
No, it's Jesse.
Oh, Jesse. Take it easy, Jesse. We can't see your face yawning, but we can hear you. Okay. Wake up that Agni inside of you. The nectar of the gods, exactly, Annika. So it's the same word in the same root as ambrosia. So this is the kind of thing that that William Jones was noticing. He's like, wait a second, these words are really, really similar. And in fact, when you say in modern Hindi, what is your name? You say, Aapka naam kya hai? And what did you hear?
No.
Naam, which means what?
Name.
Name. And in fact, in almost every Indo-European derived language, we share that cognate. And I'll introduce that word to you. What is a cognate?
Words in different languages with shared histories.
It's actually, yeah, so words in different languages that come from a common ancestral word. So the word name in English is the same as naam in Hindi. So they are the same word, actually, and they you can still see the relationship between them. And another word, actually, that he noticed is in Sanskrit, the word pitar is very similar to the Latin word pater, which means what?
Father.
Father, exactly. And in fact, can you see the relationship of our English word father to the Latin word pater? How are they related? How is the word father related to pater? What's similar about them?
Father is the fricative version.
Exactly. We'll see that you have a shift from the P to the F, which is something that only happened in Germanic languages. And actually, the Brothers Grimm, you've heard of them?
Yeah.
What did they do?
They're the original Disney people. So
Yeah, so Disney
so
borrows a lot from the Brothers Grimm because the Grimm's fairy tales, right? So
Yeah.
Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood. They were actually philologists, German philologists who were interested in looking at folk tales, and they went all around Europe looking at similar tales that they figured must have come from a common ancestor. And yeah, so it's actually the study of folklore, which is a whole other discipline related to linguistics and mythology. But the Brothers Grimm are famous for noticing this shift that occurred in all German-derived languages, including English, where we have an F instead of a P. And you can see it in words like Pisces, right? Which is what? Who's a Pisces out there?
Fish.
It's fish, right? Do you see the word? It's related. You have the P to the F shift as well, right? So in Latin languages, Romance languages, you have pesce, right? Well, anyway, all different kinds of P words for fish. So there's these universal shifts that took place from the Latin, or from the ancient Indo-European root, which includes both Latin and Sanskrit. And then you can see in Germanic languages, there's an F. So there's so many versions of this, actually. The word, 5 in Latin, penta, becomes fünf, or 5 in English. Many, many things like this. All right, so let's just sing together now. If you go all the way up to the top here, and I'm trying to get rid of my little thing because now it's blocking the first line for me. And if I put my cursor up there, it's gonna actually cloud it over. But we start actually right up here. And it goes something like this. Agni mile porohitam yajñasya devam mrtvijam. And so all of these actually, you see these little red marks in here? Those are tone marks because there's a pentatonic scale that the Brahmin priests have to memorize. So there are people who are raised from very young ages in a particular caste. These are upper caste people who learn the religious texts. And they learn how to read this, but then they memorize it and learn how to sing it because actually originally it was sung. So thousands upon thousands of verses that are all sung. And basically the translation is, we pray to Agni, who is the priest at the doorway. And so the very first prayer is actually to this fire god, Agni. We know that that comes from a common Indo-European root, which is the ancient religion of all Indo-European peoples, actually, that then went into Europe as well. So more on that later. So this is what William Jones has to say. Does anybody want to read? Can I get a volunteer?
I can do it.
Go for it. Sarai.
The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either. Yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, both in the roots of verbs and the forms of grammar that could possibly have been produced by accident, so strong indeed that no philosopher could examine them all
Philologer,
three.
sorry.
Philologer, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Without believing them to have sprung from some common source which perhaps no longer exists. There is a similar reason, though not quite so forcible, for supposing that both the Gothic and the Celtic, though blended with a very different idiom, had the same origin with the Sanskrit, and the Old Persian might be added to the same family.
Okay, so what's he saying?
That all these languages are related to, like, he's suggesting that there is an Indo-European language family.
Exactly. He was the first one to suggest that all of these languages have a common ancestor and that it's no accident that we find all of these cognates in all of them. And so not just Sanskrit, but also Persian and the Germanic languages, Gothic, as well as Celtic, as well as Latin. So he especially was looking at the oldest versions of each one of these languages before they had changed significantly. And so going back in time, looking at Latin, going back in time, looking at Gothic, looking at Old Celtic, looking at Sanskrit, and then Old Persian, and noticing some remarkable similarities. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those similarities. Here we have a list of what we call a cognate list. So all of these are looking at or attempting to look at whether these words are cognates or words that come from common ancestral words in each one of these languages. And so look at the comparison here. We have English, Old German, Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, and then actually Old Japanese on the right. And notice the line actually, and you'll see why that line is there. And what are these? These, of course, in English, you can see are numbers, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now compare across the line. So for each one of these, so if you're looking at the number 1, you see 1, and in Old German, eins, Latin unus, Greek eis, and Sanskrit ekas. They may not look the same exactly to you, but take a look at which one of these is the most similar all across all of those languages.
3.
3, very good. So you see how in English the number 3 is very similar to the Old German thria, but in Latin there is tres, and then Greek treis, and then Sanskrit trias. All of them have that TR connection, right? TRE, in fact, or TR vowel. But English and German don't have a T, they have a th sound, which is something that we got actually from the Vikings that have that th that is actually quite rare in Indo-European languages. But in Latin and Greek, they just have a tra, and in Sanskrit also a trayas. Can you see any others that are really similar across the board?
9.
9, okay. We have 9 in English and neun in German and novum in Latin. Of course, where do you recognize that novem?
November.
November, yes. But wait a second, November isn't the 9th month. Why is it called November?
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute. And October isn't the 8th month, and September isn't the 7th month. What's going on here? December isn't the 10th month. But
July.
those words come from
Could it
those
be
numbers.
old calendar?
Exactly. They are from the old calendar, actually, before Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar decided to stick actually 11th and 12th month in the middle of the summer, which are called July and August. It used to be that September was the 7th month, October the 10th month, and October the 8th month, November the 9th month, and December the 10th month. So they add 2 to each one of those. And so actually when I write those, when you write the month and you have to convert the month into a number, like you change November into 11, because I know the root of November is 9, I sometimes make the mistake and put 9 instead of 11. I do the same thing with October. Okay, but anyway, so we have 9, neun, novum, enia, and nava. The same thing across all of those is that N sound. Anything else you notice?
6 is really similar.
6, exactly. 6, sais, sex, hex, and sat. So the Greek is a bit different in some of these cases, where that seem to have actually reversed some of the sounds with a metathesis. But other than that, you have a lot of similarities. Do you see how this works, everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay. So what we are doing is actually, we're looking at shared cognates. It's a shared cognate list. And we're going to be doing this when we actually do our next paper assignment, where you're going to be looking at and comparing different cognates across Indo-European languages. But what do you notice about the Japanese words? And notice they are not the numbers typically used by Japanese speakers today. Those Japanese numbers like ich, ni, and san, and so on, those are actually derived from Cantonese numbers. And so they're very similar to Chinese numbers. But these are the original Japanese numbers: hitatsu, futatsu, mitsu, yotsu, itsutsu, and mutsu, nanatsu, yatsu, and kokonatsu, and to. Do you see any similarities between those and the Indo-European languages on the left?
No.
None?
Mm.
Which one might you suggest would be similar?
So, number 10.
To, okay. But it's only similar in just that T sound with our English 10 and the German tayum, whereas the other Indo-European languages have decem, deca, and dasa. So why do you think the Japanese to might be similar to the English 10, given all the other evidence, or lack thereof?
Just coincidental.
It's just a coincidence, exactly. So you can always find what we call false cognates, which look like they may be related to some other language in another language family, especially. And that leads some, I would say, non-cautious linguists to suggest that they may be related, but they are not. And so there is always a coincidence that's going to happen with the many different words that we have and just the limited number of possible phonemes we have. So the sounds are going to be similar across languages because we only have a set number of sounds the mouth can make. But you can see how none of the other numbers are similar in any way. And for to be related to English 10, but not to decem and deca and dasa would be actually really, really a stretch. It would be just one tiny piece of evidence compared to all of the other evidence, which would seem to disprove that. You get it?
Yes.
So be careful of the false cognates and be careful of when things look similar, but they may not be. You have to look at all the rest of the evidence and consider it. All right, so moving on. So the Grimm brothers, as I mentioned, introduced to the world after, this is after William Jones, they introduced to the world the great consonant shift, which took place about 2,000 years ago in the Germanic languages as the Germanic languages split off from the other Indo-European languages. And we have these interesting shifts from voiceless stops like P to the voiceless fricatives like F, as in pater to father. And so we also have the T shift to the th or the theta shift, and that's in that second pater to father. There is actually a K to an H shift where we have words like cornus, meaning horn, as in cornucopia, changing to the English and German horn. So a K to a H shift. And then we have words like horse, as in equus, like equestrian, shifting to words like horse. So the English word horse is related to, distantly, the Latin word equus, which is related to the Indo-European word equus. So we also have voice stops changing to voiceless stops, as in B's to P's, D's to T's, G's to K's, Gwas to Quas, and aspirated stops, which we still see in words like Bharat in India, changing to unaspirated stops, where we can't even do that actually in English. Okay, so someone wants to connect to my iPhone. No, that's my iPhone. Ignore. All right, let's see. So moving on. So when we look at language variation through time, we're interested in historical linguistics and looking at how these different languages are spread out on maps, as you did in the discussion board this week, and as we just did today. But the big question is, how language changes over time, and there's a debate about whether language has a regular change, so that all languages will regularly change over time at some set rate, or if they have punctuated change, which means what?
They'll change occasionally.
Exactly. So change suddenly with large changes. What do you think? Do languages change regularly, or are there times where we see really great dramatic shifts in language? And what
Probably a
might
little
lead
bit of
to
both.
these things? Go ahead.
Probably a little bit of both. Like
A
there's
little bit of both,
probably
yeah.
times where that happens in great shifts. I'm sure there's evidence for that, but also
What
probably
might lead
just
to a great shift, do you think, Adam?
invasion of another language,
You got it, exactly. If you think about the Roman Empire, right, bringing Latin and spreading that all over the Mediterranean and invading all these other people that spoke languages like Basque and all the other relatives of Basque that are now extinct, you have massive changes. And so sometimes that can be as complete replacement of other languages, in which case it renders the former languages extinct. But in other cases, you have just heavy, heavy influence of one language on another, like you see with 1066, the French Norman invasion of England. We have all of this shift to French words, incorporating French loanwords and things like that. Okay, so there is a debate, though, in trying to establish through a technique called glottochronology and lexicostatistics. I've written on the chat board for you. So glottochronology and lexicostatistics are these kind of quasi-mathematical ways of trying to figure out how long ago any two languages were related. And they do that by comparing cognate lists. So just like we did with the numbers, there are ways of actually comparing hundreds and hundreds of words in one language with another and seeing the slight differences or dramatic differences between them. The more numbers of differences will indicate how long ago the two languages were related. But of course, both of those assume a regular rate of language change. And that is not necessarily the case. So you're not going to necessarily get a really reliable number all of the time, especially as you go farther and farther back in time. And this is where a lot of historical linguists differ in terms of whether they want to subscribe to the idea of a regular rate of change or punctuated change. And so what a linguist whose name is Maurice Swadesh has done is he's actually come up with what he calls a core vocabulary in Indo-European languages, which are words that tend to be resistant to change, words that don't seem to be lexically replaced by other words over time. And what kind of words would those be, do you think?
Pronouns.
Pronouns like he, she, yeah, absolutely. What else? What words
Probably
do you
some of
think?
the
Say it
first
again.
words that people learn, like
Yeah,
father, mother.
exactly. Father, mother, really simple vocabulary, water, all of these kinds of things. So he came up with a couple, well, actually about 100 of these. These were then expanded to over 200, and that's called the Swadesh list. And so many linguists, historical linguists, use the Swadesh list to try to compare two languages with one another and then see how many changes there are between them if they are related, right, in the first place, and they're in the same language family. It's a technique that they use in order to try to figure out how long ago any two languages are related. Okay, so as I mentioned, in Indo-European, vowels tend to change faster than consonants. So vowels as in the difference between different accents of English versus shifts in consonants like we see with the Grimm's shifts, where Germanic languages replace all the P's with the F's and so on. In Indo-European, these things seem to be true, but in other language families, there are other types of changes like tonal languages that change in very different ways. And so the Swadesh list doesn't work as well in some of those languages. Okay. So we're going to be actually doing this on our project together. I'll actually walk with you and help you with this as much as possible. It's going to be difficult to do it here in this format, but I'm going to see what I can do to adapt the project. But without me explaining it, it can be very challenging, but I'll try to walk you all through it so we can all work on it and take a good day sometime next week and really and work on this. And I'll actually have to postpone the date that that's due. So hang in there about that. Are there any questions so far about this? Does anybody want to ask me something while you got me here?
Can I ask something about the list of numbers and how similar they are?
Certainly, Javier, yes. Right here?
Yeah.
What about it?
Wouldn't this as a sample be somehow skewed? Because in this case, we're talking about math.
Mm-hmm.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I don't know who invented the numerals. I guess everybody invented the numerals,
Well,
but
the actual written numerals, are you talking about?
just the use of numbers
The
was
use of
probably
the words themselves, yeah, because the written version of those numbers is only from the Arabs that gave us our Arabic numerals. Before that, we used Roman numerals. And before that, you know, cultures have and languages had words for numbers, but they weren't written down. But go ahead.
But it could be something similar to what's happening today with computers.
Okay.
Have a language that has been developed in English,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have, I don't know, much to do with intermingling of cultures or what is
Sure.
good
I
for.
think I know what you're getting at here. So
It's a
looking at
technical
just this skewed
fact.
sample of numbers is just you know, a limited comparison. And yes, that is true. And so, but what these are, we tend to see in the Swadesh list that the base numbers 1 through 10 are relatively stable in languages, and they don't tend to change over time. The only way that they start to change is through sound shifts and things like that. But if you look at many, many other core vocabulary like mother, father, water, horn, dog, a tooth, all of the tongue, many of words like that, sun, sky, those words tend to be very stable as well over time. And Swadesh argued that they, like these numbers 1 through 10, are pretty stable. And so, yes, it's a particular semantic domain, I think you're pointing out, of numbers, which may be, you know, separate from other aspects of culture, and numbers may have been passed down, you know, in another way from culture to culture, and language to language. But what he found is that these numbers actually do have roots in Indo-European, and so that Proto-Indo-European, that ancient ancestral language, which linguists since William Jones have been trying to reconstruct, that Proto-Indo-European had all of these words and had an ancestral form of all of these words. And that's one of the fascinating conclusions of this, is that we can see that these base numbers, as well as many other of the core vocabulary, were actually shared among all Indo-European languages at one point, with a common ancestral language.
Okay, let me see if I understand this. These are shared by everybody because they are a technical thing to call it somehow. They are numbers.
There's something that is used in everyday life. Why they tend not to change is an interesting question. They seem to be useful to people, or at least they've been useful in the past few thousand years, since they were all shared by a common ancestral language. The idea is that all of these languages, English, German, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, all come from a common ancestor that was one language. How long ago that language was spoken has been something we've been trying to figure out through this idea of glottochronology and lexicostatistics. But we do know that they all come from a common ancestral language that linguists call Proto-Indo-European. And we can try to figure out exactly what those words originally were before they changed into all the daughter languages which came from that ancestral language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so if I understand this correctly, some words like father, pater, and so on and so forth are the same in all these languages.
They came from the same ancestral root. So those words are cognates in the different Indo-European languages, like father and pater, and pitar in Sanskrit. Actually, the word is very similar, and that's what William Jones noticed. And so the hypothesis was that they must come from a common ancestor, and that's what we think actually happened, and we have lots of evidence for it. So yes, I think I get where you're going with this, but let's continue on, and I'll try to explain a little bit more. So the concepts that we need to understand here. Oh, Miriam is asking me language of the day. I forgot the language of the day. Shall I go to the language of the day? Shall we shift gears for a moment?
Yes.
Are you okay with that? All right. Hold on. I have to stop sharing this. You're going to see my big head again. And I need to call upon Jennifer. So let's see. All right. Anybody want to pick a continent?
Let's do one of those Southern Indian languages we talked about.
Oh, let's do Tamil. Yes. Okay. I actually can help you with that right away. I do know a little Tamil. So let's do the chat here. And oh, looks like a lot of people were writing things that I didn't catch up on. I'll try to catch up on the chats. They're talking to each other on the chat. That's good. Okay. So Tamil, which is spoken in southern India. Tamil, in order to say hello, you will say Vanakkam. And everybody say Vanakkam.
Vanakkam.
Vanakkam. Vanakkam. And then we're gonna pull up, let's see.
Florida, it's kicking.
Here we go. Whoops, Tamil. I'll pull this up here. And we can all look at it together, just like in class. Whoops. Jennifer is not working today. Let's try it again. Tamil. Here we go. Let's see. I think I have to share the screen again right here. Is this right? No. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, so here we have Vanakkam.
Vanakkam.
Vanakkam, which almost sounds like, and it's also used for welcome, like you're actually welcoming somebody into your house. Vanakkam. And Tamil, you can see how it's written. It's really beautiful writing system. We're going to study that actually when we get to writing systems. But it uses a writing system that was derived from Sanskrit, even though their language itself is not an Indo-European language. It's a what language?
Dravidian.
Dravidian, thank you, exactly. It's a Dravidian language. So if you see how it works, actually, it's called an abugida, which uses consonant and vowel combinations, where that would be a va, and this would be a na here. Oops, right, I'll try and do it letter by letter. Va, na, and then this is a ka, but with that dot actually just says you make the K by itself. And then this is a ka, so it's vanakkam. And so you would not say the vowel after the M because of the dot at the top. So vanakkam. It's vanakkam. And then to actually say how are you, it's ni epadi irokirai. Can you say that?
Ni apadi irokirai.
All right, everybody try it. Ni epadi irokirai.
Ni apedi irokirai.
There you go. Okay. The response to ni epadi irokirai is nan nalapadiaka irokiren. I'll try it. Nan nalapadiaka irokiren. Irokiren. Okay, let's start over from the beginning. Here we go. Vanakkam. Vanakkam.
Vanakkam.
Ni epadi irokirai.
Ni apedi
Excellent. Nan nalapadiaka irokiren.
Jesus Christ.
So let me just show you actually how, remember when I said how you can say what your name is in Hindi, is you can hear that word name, right? So if you say, what's your name in Hindi? It's Aapka naam kya hai? Aapka naam kya hai? But if you say, what's your name in Tamil, it's actually totally different. It's, oh my gosh, let me think of this. Anga, peyar, and na. There is no cognate at all because it's a different language family, right? It's Dravidian. But what's interesting is actually the order of the word. The word order is the same in Tamil as it is in Sanskrit. And so you can have borrowings of word order actually. When you have, for example, the Indo-Europeans invading India, the people that they invaded mixed together with the Indo-Europeans and actually influenced their language. So when you say Aapka naam kya hai, you say your name what is really the literal translation. And the same thing for anga, peyar, and na is your name what is. So the verb comes at the end. Okay, so that's our lesson for our language of the day.